know this, but I don't want to identify you as the unidentified reporter seated next to Lacey Crisp. Tell me your name again.
I got a question.
First time. This is the second one. So the second one is that
So instead of coming down here to 160, he keeps doing this. When you line up this, here, so it shows 65. These are calculations. These are
Well, no.
So
That's it. All right. Back ready to go, Mr. Brignan, redirect.
I want to ask you a question before phase. You recall in your testimony on cross being shown a couple of videos of semi-drivers that with a forward, inward-facing camera?
Yes.
Okay. And can you describe to me what's going on in each one of those videos?
Well, from my recollection, for the brief, we saw a driver with a phone in their hand, operating their phone, traveling. The vehicles were relatively straight in their lane from what it appeared. And they came upon a line of stopped traffic. And there's a moment of panic in their eyes, and they aren't able to avoid
Okay.
the collision.
Did you make any observations as to relation to maybe their eyes?
Well, and again, I watched two short videos very briefly, and I can't recall anything specific about their eyes, other than it appeared to me from their head movement that their eyes were directed between their phone and the road.
Did it appear to you that they saw the vehicles in front of them at some point in time?
It did right at the last second, but to no effect,
Okay.
right?
Did they appear to have reacted when they saw those vehicles in front of them?
You saw basically what it appeared to me, and again, going on something that I saw briefly, it appeared to me that there was kind of a moment of shock, where they kind of tensed up, which, and again, without being able to see their feet or know specifically, maybe there was some hand movement. I don't really specifically recall.
Okay.
And but there was a kind of a brief instant of horror on the face.
Okay. So, if you, as you are, a reconstruction expert, traffic reconstruction expert, if you were shown those two videos and said this is our baseline as to what constitutes distracted driving, and then given the facts here of what we know with regards to the steering box and reaction, is that the same thing?
Well, we have no evidence on the steering box of any steering in this case.
Right.
And there could have been, and again, I'd want to review the videos to confirm it, but my memory seems to think that there was some kind of effort, albeit to no effect, in the last brief second in those cases.
Okay.
But and again, I'm going on memory, and I
Okay.
can't be 100% sure.
Okay. You talked with Mr. Murphy about perception time, and can you re-explain just the idea of perception time?
Right. So we refer to the whole concept as perception response, but before there's a response, there has to be a perception.
Okay.
So there has to be a detection. You have to know that there's something there. You have to be able to identify it, and then you have to make a decision. So the first two are often referred to as the perception part of the equation of perception response. And so, we have to visually intake it and process it. For our eyeballs, it's not instant. And there's been many studies done, and there's a whole field that deals with that, a field of study that deals with perception response. And within that field of perception response, there's subfields specifically dealing with the driving task.
Okay.
And so in this case, basically or I should say, in all cases, they try and establish what's a reasonable amount of time for a given situation, how long a driver should take to detect, identify, decide, and respond to a given situation.
And sometimes that could be, you said earlier, I believe, a second and a half. Is that what you mean?
From the point where, for example, let's say a typical one where we often use a second and a half is, let's say, an intersection accident where you've got a car that pulls out in front of you. from, let's say, from the right or the left. There's a good study on that one that's done in Eastern Liberty, Ohio here, that basically shows that the 50th percentile driver, the average driver, is going to take somewhere around about 1.5 seconds to perceive, respond, and touch the brakes. That's to the point from where the car starts to move to the point when a driver will start to apply the brakes.
Okay.
And some drivers are obviously faster. Some drivers might be closer to 1 second, where other ones might be closer to 2 seconds.
Okay. You mentioned the brakes. Is there a lag time on the brakes?
On a passenger vehicle, the lag time is almost so small we don't even really consider it. But on a heavy truck, it's an air brake system. So on air brakes, a heavy truck uses compressed.
For the record, we're going to object unless he establishes a foundation for this particular truck that he's talking about.
Sustain the objection at this point.
Okay. You spent a great deal of time talking about frame 24 to frame 33, right? You recall that with Mr. Murphy
Yes,
and the shadow of the bridge
yes,
and the distance of there of 700 feet? I
yes.
think was
Well,
somewhere around there.
yes.
I'm not pinning you down on that. Just prior to that, we watched the van, Eugene Mans was driving, move out from in front of the truck. Do you recall that?
Yes,
And in your opinion, did he aggressively move out from in front of the truck?
it didn't appear that way to me.
So he just kind of moves over into the other lane, right?
Correct.
You wouldn't quantify that or qualify that as aggressive or evasive maneuvers?
No, I did not.
Okay. So, to assume at frame 24, which is at the bridge, that Jacob McDonald wasn't paying attention for, I think, 6 or 7 seconds is what's being said, you also would have to have assumed that the hard braking event occurred at frame 24, correct?
Which hard braking event? does-
Well, that the bus brake had
Okay.
applied its brakes, correct?
So, yes, the bus applied its brakes at some point to slow down, correct?
But we're not saying that happened in frame 24. Are you opining to that?
No, I'm not opining to that.
Okay. So, if we have the white van moving out of the lane in a, I'm going to use the word normal manner, a non-aggressive normal manner,
Right?
then as an expert, does that tell us that there's an immediate threat at 24? Frame 24?
It would not appear that there was one for Mr. Mann.
Okay. So, the event in which Jacob McDonald hadn't observed yet could very well not have been at frame 24, but rather further up, frame 28, frame 29. Correct?
Objection, speculation.
I'm not asking you to speculate, I'm asking you.
Counsel, why don't you approach up here? Objection sustained. You may continue, Mr. Ritter.
Okay. So as we approach, you testified earlier that there are different types of distracted driving, correct?
There,
I
yes.
think you offered a numerous of examples.
Yes.
I believe you offered looking out at the car next to you, equipment and stuff, this sort of stuff. Coffee cup, I believe you mentioned. You recall all that?
Right.
Okay. So, you're not opining to when exactly that, if it did occur at all, happened in that sequence of frames that you were testifying to earlier, correct?
Correct. I have no idea what happened.
Okay. All right. Now, we spent a great deal of time on the elevation. And did you note that the bus different changes in the elevation to their Garmin data?
Yes,
Okay. So, and that's similar to what the Google map is that you pulled up?
yes. If you
Okay.
look at it, you can almost kind of follow the traces, and for a little bit, they look relatively similar.
Okay, so that's not unique to that we're not saying that that's unique, the elevation would have been unique to the Freightliner, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, as far as the cruise control goes, I believe that you indicated that you rely upon what you're told.
Correct.
Okay. And you were given that information through your client, which you call the attorneys.
Yes.
Okay. Would it surprise you if the owner of the company itself testified that it was 70 off, 72 on?
No, it wouldn't surprise me.
Okay. And again, that means 70 off means you're off cruise control, correct?
Correct.
And 72 means the cruise control is on.
Correct.
Okay. And you were asked about your opinion on recklessness, and I want to be sure here, you were referring to data, correct?
When I was looking at it, and I was specifically referring to the speed data.
Speed data, that was it.
Correct. That's all we have.
Okay. And we have the two, so in the Nissan EDR, we have the two triggers, correct?
Correct.
We have two events that are triggered, that are recorded, that we went through the graphs on, you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. And the second event is not in Sergeant Jasper's report, is that?
It's not discussed in Jasper's report.
Okay. And so you took the Toyota data and you were able to determine that the Toyota Highlander was going about 8 or 9 miles an hour. I believe you said 8.6.
8.6 or 8.7,
Okay.
and again, it's just under 9 miles an hour.
And then we were able to determine with a 32 mile an hour speed increase, it was about 40, correct?
Correct.
And that's also at odds with the Nissan EDR data, correct?
It basically contradicts in the sense that if we're looking at the Nissan EDR data, it suggests that the bus only, or basically would accelerate it somewhere to 35 miles an hour.
Okay. And the,
So it was only accelerated up to about 35 miles an hour, yes.
and the Toyota that's in front of it saying it accelerated to 40 miles an hour.
Correct.
Okay. And again, those two triggered events, we have the one, the 57 delta that we've heard about, which shows it going up, correct?
Correct.
And then we have the negative 37.
Correct.
Okay. And those two things are at odds with one another.
Correct.
Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Recross, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you. Can we use the, sir, you were asked again about the Nissan,
Yes, I was.
and you were asked about the electronic data recorder in the Nissan,
Yes, I was.
and you were asked about these data results being inconsistent and not lining up,
Correct.
and that's what your belief is?
Correct.
You testified, and I asked you earlier, though, about whether or not you had any of the spreadsheets that you reviewed in this particular case relative to that. You remember that, sir?
You asked me about it, yes, and I said I do not have them with me.
Sir, I'm going to show you what's asked me marked State's Exhibit number 20.
Let's see,
29.
I got 26.
You asked that this be marked State's Exhibit 27. Sir, there are two events that this recorded, this Nissan, I think you testified to and you're asked again about. Does that sound correct?
Yes,
Okay. And record 1 and record 2. And I think you indicated at some point that they were at odds with each other, that they didn't line up.
correct.
I'm going to show you this specific Excel sheet. And it looks like we have time in milliseconds. I think you were using 1. And I believe that actually it's 160 milliseconds. And at 1.60 milliseconds, they actually do line up. And then they start tracking right down from the change from 0 to 0 to 0.6 to 0 to 0.6 in this particular case. Is that accurate, sir?
What you're showing me, it appears that way, yes.
And if that's the case, the data that was provided, assuming that that is the case, that they line up, the data that was provided on the speed of the Nissan and utilized by Sergeant Trevor Jasper would be validated and correct. Agree?
Well,
I asked you, assuming that that is correct.
I'm looking at it, I'm not agreeing that we're showing a point, we're showing when we look at the time between events is showing at 0.1, not at 0.16.
That's a roundup, sir, on number 2. If we're looking down on event recorder number 1, the longitude delta D data, and now I'm specifically looking at Defendant's Exhibit D, and it's page 6 of 16, and I track down to 1, you have mile per hour at 41, correct?
Yes,
And then if you go down to 160, it lines up to 57, correct?
yes.
Okay, so the intersection between that data on event record 1 and event record number 2, and now I'm looking at page 8 on that. You see where it says 0.1 on time from event 1
Yes.
to, and it says 0.1?
Yes.
When we look at the actual data link from the first one to event 2, it's actually 160 milliseconds, and that's from table 1.
Right.
And then, again, going back and showing this again, again, looking at State's Exhibit 27, it all zeroes out at that point, correct?
So I'm just being careful here because we've got the miles and the kilometers. And so I'm just looking at the miles per hour on this particular one. So if we have 160, and I'm agreeing with your chart that it's rounding out. But if I'm looking at the data on page 6 of 16, if we make the data point, let's say assume instead of being 0.1 seconds, it's actually 0.16 seconds, then in the next 100 seconds, 100 milliseconds, or 1/10 of a second, it's lost 2 miles an hour on page 6 of 16.
The actual loss chart, when,
All right.
when they line up, is equal.
But let's move that over.
I'm not asking you, I'm asking you it looks like it's even then when you go to 190 milliseconds
Right, so,
and at 210 milliseconds. They're moving as one at this point, these two vehicles, not as separate vehicles.
correct.
So if you were to come up and punch me, and that's it, I would move in a different direction from that force than if you were to come up and bear hug me and continue to move.
Correct.
And in this case, you have two vehicles that have joined up and have become one vehicle at this point.
Right.
And so the event recorder is now logging both of these as a single unit.
Okay, so we're not, when we're looking at the data from here, he's showing the data being expressed in the Excel spreadsheet is shown differently than what it's in here. So if I look at the data, and this is what I'm using, the data from the ACM, and I agree, what you're showing me, what you're saying is correct. But if we line up these 2 points, and we say at 160 milliseconds, speed is 57 miles an hour, or 91 kilometers an hour. And then we look at point 250, we're at 55 miles an hour. Then if we look at the second chart, we've lost 2 miles an hour. And it's on the left side, it's only showing we're losing 1 mile an hour. Excuse me, we're losing 1 mile an hour, even though he's showing 2. But we've lost 2 miles an hour on page 6 of 16. And I recognize that he's playing with some conversion here to kilometers. But at the end of the day, there is a discrepancy.
At the end of the day, they line up at 160 milliseconds and not at 1 millisecond. And that you have these two things start to read in parallel to each other at 160 milliseconds, correct?
Well, we can agree to disagree.
So the Excel sheet is wrong in your opinion?
No, what I'm saying to you is that we're just looking at it from the miles per hour. Okay?
I'm listening.
Page 6 of 16. 160 milliseconds, 57 miles an hour. 250 milliseconds, 55 miles an hour. Loss of 2 miles an hour. Flip over, page 10 of 16. In the first 100 milliseconds, it's only lost 1 mile an hour. Not 2 miles an hour, as the other one shows.
The lateral data from event record 1 stops registering at that time period, sir.
What are we going on with lateral now?
I'm looking at the lateral data.
Longitudinal. We're dealing with longitudinal data.
Right, I'm looking at the table that says lateral delta V event record.
On event record 1?
That was record 1.
Time to maximum lateral delta V. Is at 92 milliseconds.
Looking at page 5, the event record number 1, and looking at page 9, the event record 2,
Page 9 and 16.
page 5, and page 9.
Okay, we're looking at pre-crash data.
And this is for both of these event data recorders, correct? pre-crash data,
Yes,
you're lining up.
yeah. Except the last entry at 0.
And what's happening at the last entry of 0?
It's being accelerated up.
Okay? And then looking at the longitudinal data, event record 1 on page 6, your figure was at 100 milliseconds, or is that 1 second? This number up here is 100 milliseconds.
Correct, 1/10 of a second.
Right. That is tracking independently of what's going on the data recorder number 2.
Correct.
At 160 milliseconds, they both zero out. That's accurate.
On what you're showing me here. What I'm pointing out to you, you look at line 160.
Mm-hmm.
It's being shown here as 56.6.
Correct.
In the report, the number is 57.
It's rounded up to 57.
Well, how do you know it's rounded up?
I'm just asking, does that round up to 57, or is that?
Again, I'd have to go back, and I can't sit here and know. I'd have to go back and look at research papers to find if they rounded it up or truncated.
Okay, so you don't know then?
Some truncate, some round.
Okay.
And I can't sit here and pretend that I know whether it rounds or truncates. Some do, some don't. And so then when we're looking here at 55, that's at 57. Line 250 in the report that I'm looking at right here is 55 miles an hour. So that's a loss of 2 miles an hour.
Right.
And what you're showing over on the right side at 100 is a loss of 2 miles an hour. But in my chart and on the report, it shows a loss of 1 mile an hour.
So at 160 and 170 on event data up through 180, we have the same speed, 57, from event record number 1.
Yes,
And then what we have is that at 190, we are down 1 mile. Correct?
yeah,
At 190, we're down here -1. Correct?
so what you're showing here on this chart, so again, on this, what I'm saying, on this chart that you're looking at, it's showing a loss of 1.3 miles per hour.
It's recorded as -1. Whether that's truncated or rounded down, I don't know, but it's showing the same loss of 1 mile an hour.
They're showing two different numbers. And I just
Okay.
explained this, so I don't know how many times we have to go around this.
Well, let's just try it one more time. Looking at page 6,
Yes,
the longitudinal delta V, event record number 1,
yes,
at 160, and in fact from 140 through 180, the event data record is showing 57 miles an hour.
correct,
And then thereafter, at 190, it's showing 56.
correct,
At 200, it shows 56.
correct.
And so at that point in time, if we go up here and we're looking at this Excel spreadsheet, what we're seeing is loss of 1 mile an hour, loss of 1 mile an hour. Then I want to take you to the next line, which is at 210. And through 210 through 250, the last recorded, it is at -2 miles an hour, which is matching up on both sides, -2 and at 55 miles an hour. Is that accurate, what I just said, sir?
That is accurate.
Thank you.
But let's now go to.
Sir, there's no question in front of you.
Okay.
You're asked about the truck again, and what the driver was or wasn't doing. I'm going to tell you what's previously been marked State's Exhibit 2A. Are you familiar with State's Exhibit 2A, sir?
I've seen this photograph before.
Does it appear to be the driver's seat of a semi truck, in this case, a similar Freightliner?
Correct.
Which position does that seat face, sir?
It's a forward-facing seat.
And what is the design purpose of having a forward-facing seat in a Freightliner, or other semis, sir?
Well, I think for all vehicles, a forward-facing seat so you can look down the road ahead of you where you're going.
And as a professional driver, you literally only have one job. And that's to do exactly what you said. No further questions.
Thank you, sir. You may step down.
Thank you.
Mr. Brignan, your next witness.
Defense would call Anthony Gentili.
Solemnly swear testimony is about to give this case now being heard as the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Proceed. State your full name, spare last name, please, for records.
My name is Anthony Gentili. Last name spelled Gentile.
Thanks, sir.
You may inquire.
Thank you. You state your name. Can you state your occupation for the record, please?
My occupation is a digital forensic analyst for Vista Forensics.
Okay. And what's your current role in this?
As a digital forensic analyst, I provide consulting and analytical review of call detail records, historical cell site analysis, and mobile device forensics for defense attorneys, prosecutors, and plaintiffs' attorneys.
Okay. And do you hold any certifications in the area of digital forensics?
I do. I'm a Cellbrite certified operator, Cellbrite certified physical analyst, and I've received training from other sources as well.
Okay. Have you ever been qualified to testify as an expert in criminal or civil trial before?
I have 4 qualifications and testimonies in criminal cases.
You were retained as an expert, and you were given some materials to review in this case, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And did your analysis include the AT&T call detail records?
Yes.
And those would be report AU_382399 and report AU_3837301. Does that sound familiar?
Correct.
Okay. And what do these AT&T data sessions reflect?
So AT&T data sessions, these records reflect a phone number's use of the internet using the AT&T network. Communication with the internet through AT&T's network. So that would be independent of any internet source the phone may have. An example is Wi-Fi. If you're on Wi-Fi, that's not going to be using the AT&T network. This is communication with the internet using AT&T towers. So I say cell sites, I mean the towers that AT&T has to provide a service for their network.
Okay. So, make sure I understand that. If I'm at my house and I have Wi-Fi, I'm connecting through my Wi-Fi, and as of right now, my phone's connecting to the tower. Is that
Correct.
correct? Okay. Now, does a data, what do the bytes up and byte down mean?
So bytes up and bytes down refer to communication with the internet. Bytes up records data that goes from the phone to the tower. Bytes down would be data that comes from the tower to the phone.
Okay. And does the user have to initiate that?
No, so internet-enabled devices are constantly in communication with the AT&T network, and then applications are constantly performing activity while minimized in the background or while not open immediately on the phone. There's many examples of that. You can receive messages through an internet-based messaging service such as Facebook Messenger, while you're not actually holding the phone or in the same area as the phone, and it would appear that data is being used for that transaction.
So if I'm standing here right now connected to the tower on a cell phone, and someone sends me, what you just said, a Facebook Messenger thing, say with a video of sorts, and it comes to my phone, is it logging that data?
Yes, it's using data when it transmitted it to your device, ready for you to view whenever you would view it. But you do not have to take it out of your phone or accept that message. The message comes through and that data is transferred to your phone without you having to do anything to manipulate the device.
Okay. Now, those records I want to show you here. I have this as Defense Exhibit C. Are these the records that you looked at?
Yes,
Okay. And is this a true and accurate copy of what you looked at?
it is.
Okay. And before we talk about the data itself, did you notice the disclaimer that AT&T made?
Yes, that's a standard disclaimer that's on their data session records, their data usage records.
What are they telling us?
Well, I'll read it and then I'll give you my interpretation of that. The AT&T network constantly communicates with internet-enabled devices when they are powered on. These communications will show as data usage on the customer records, but do not necessarily indicate a customer initiated a transaction. AT&T does not retain records that can definitively show whether a transaction was customer initiated or AT&T's network initiated the data transaction. So it's pretty straightforward to me that they're saying, AT&T is saying, from the records that you see before you here that we have, we do not know as a network whether these are user-initiated transactions or they are network-initiated transactions. They do not have the data, they do not retain records that will allow them to differentiate between what is a network-initiated transaction or user-initiated.
So, is that what we were just talking about?
It is.
So if someone sends me a Facebook message with a video, as we just discussed, and it comes into my phone, and I haven't touched my phone, and we discussed that the data is going to show up as a transfer, is that considered carrier initiated?
So that would be network initiated.
Network.
You did not do anything as the user to initiate that. The opposite of that could be you do a Google search while using cellular data. You have initiated now that transaction. But what AT&T is saying is that they don't keep a record that says whether it was initiated by the user or AT&T. Also, AT&T is in communication with the network to test their network and for reasons that they do not express to us. But they are in constant communication with the internet-enabled device, and we do not know in the records which are those or customer initiated.
Okay. Have you ever done any testing of a phone that would have no user input, but perhaps was receiving data?
Yes, so in my time as a law enforcement officer, I did work a case that was an AT&T provided cell phone, and this situation was, there was an incident location where a crime occurred, and the victim's phone was taken from the scene. I received the case after it happened, and in looking at the historical records, such as this from AT&T, the data records, I saw that there were data records that occurred after the time of the crime, and that data records existed after the time of the crime, and to me, I was puzzled as to whether there would be someone with the device or not. Well, we did find the device. The device was abandoned near the incident location on the side of the road, covered in dew, and it appeared that it had been there for a while since the incident location. That told me from that experience that it further emphasized that a phone could record data transactions while being unattended by itself.
Okay. So that's a real world example of something you already knew?
It is.
Okay. So you reviewed these records, and we have some bites up and bites down on the data of November 14th, 2023. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. And this is in con time, so it would have to be converted back, but this is about midnight here on this 5/24/18. So presumably these smaller bites up and bites down are throughout the evening. Do you agree with that?
Yes, the time does show that they're in the evening, early morning.
Okay. So the data that really becomes significant is the data that happens somewhere around 7:41. If we take 5 hours off of 12, that gives us 7:41. You agree with that?
Correct.
Okay. So we have bytes up and bytes down, which can be converted into megabytes, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So in reviewing this data in the morning of November 14th, after 7:41, is there any significance to that data?
Just that there was data that occurred on the network.
Okay. And would the size of the data be able to tell you exactly what's going on with the phone?
No, there's no way to know based on how much data, what occurred on the device. And that is evident from the disclaimer as well. AT&T doesn't even know. For me to try to make a determination when AT&T is saying, as the custodian of the records, that they can't differentiate, I do not attempt to interpret that one way or the other.
Okay. So in your opinion, in looking at the various forms of bytes up and bytes down at the different intervals that morning, can it tell us what type of activity was going on with that phone at all?
No.
What if someone suggested that there was some way AT&T had a way of knowing what the user was actually doing by looking at that data? Would that be a correct assumption?
I think it's speculative. We have no idea to know. They say they do not.
Okay. Did you notice any other, well, tell me about the last data event that occurs on there. And that would be right here, so that would make it 8:47:45.
Yes, for that transaction, it had a duration or an elapsed time of 6 minutes and 18 seconds. And so for that data session stayed open for that amount of time. And that further emphasizes to me, based on what we know about the accident and the state of the phone user at the time of the accident, that that device is conducting data independent of the user manipulating the phone.
Because it's after the accident. Is that
Correct.
So, how often do you look at these type of records?
I look at them on a regular basis. I would say call detail records are part of my everyday analysis. Going back from my time in law enforcement in 2015, I would say I've analyzed over 1,000 sets of records from the major providers, AT&T being one of those.
And as an expert in the area of, and that would be telecom or carrier side data analysis we're talking about,
Yes,
correct?
this is all information that comes directly from the provider.
Okay. As an expert on telecom data provided, in your opinion, to a reasonable degree of certainty, can you say what this data is?
I could say that it's a log of communication with the internet.
Okay. Can you, with a reasonable degree of certainty, tell us whether the user, in this case Jacob McDonald, was actively using the phone by looking at this data?
No.
No further questions. Thank you.
Cross. Thank you. Sir, do you live in Ohio?
No, sir.
Where do you live?
I live in South Carolina.
Okay. How'd you get up here in Ohio?
I took a plane.
Well, okay. Let me be a little bit more basic. Who hired you, sir,
I was
initially?
hired by my counsel.
Okay, not the trucking company?
No, sir.
You never worked for the trucking company?
No, sir.
Okay. And sir, in terms of, you use the phrase actively operated, and I think it's, you have a 5-page report here. Number 1, I guess, is the cover. Page 2 under discovery provided, and then page 3 under AT&T called data record. You use that phrase there, being actively. I was asked to determine if the data usage could indicate if the device was being actively operated by the user. What does actively operated mean to you, sir?
Manipulated by hand.
Okay. So, under that definition, if I have my phone out and I'm reading and I'm actively moving my hand around on the phone, then I'm actively operating the phone, in your opinion.
Yes.
If I turn on, and I think we had a few examples that were provided, if I was to turn on something on Rumble, could very well be, or some other streaming device, and I put it back in my pocket, am I actively operating it in your definition?
No.
Okay. So if I have data coming to my device that at some point I initiated, but I'm no longer initiating it, it's already, the message has been sent, it's being received. In your terminology, it's not being actively operated.
Correct.
Okay. And so, for instance, if when I left home and I drive 60 miles, and before I leave, I put on one of those things, I plug it in, I stick it down, I'm not actively operating it.
If you were play what?
Just, I don't know, a high definition video, a regular video, but I'm not watching and it's just sitting there and I'm listening to it.
Yes, if you were to put it out of reach, you didn't have it in your hand, you would not be actively.
I'm not actively operating.
Correct.
Okay. That was the question you were asked to answer in your 5-page report. The first part is just the cover sheet as to whether or not Mr. McDonald, at the time of the collision, was actively operating his cell phone.
Yes.
Okay. And so we're following along here. There's a different standard, as in passively activating my phone and listening to whatever it is. It could be something on an initiated audiobook. It could be something initiated on some other kind of streaming service. That's not something you were asked to look at here.
No, I was asked to look at something to see if it was actively operating.
Under that limited definition. Okay. Sir, what is UTC time?
Universal time coordinates.
Okay.
So that is a 5-hour difference from where we were looking at during the time of the incident.
And that would be Eastern time.
Correct.
Okay. And sir, would you agree or disagree that between 8:20 to 8:37, in this particular case, that there was a substantial amount of data that was transmitted to this phone of Mr. McDonald's?
I'd have to refer to the records.
Please look at your report.
I don't have the records in my report.
Okay. You have yours. Yeah.
Can you say those times again, please?
Yeah, 8:20 to 8:37.
I think it's relative. So bytes down and bytes up.
Well, walk us through what they are.
So you're measuring it in bytes, which is the smallest unit of measurement for data that are recorded on here. It takes 1 million to make up a megabyte. And if we look at a picture, if you were going to email a picture of 3 images.
Sir, can you answer my question?
Yes, I thought you wanted me to explain.
No, I'd like you to
bytes up,
answer
bytes
how
down.
much data was from 8:20 to 8:37 received.
How much data you want me to add it up.
If you don't mind.
I would say there was no, I can't do the math up here of how many millions of.
Does it look like 203.86 megabytes of data downstream and 6.72 megabytes of data upstream?
I can't say. I didn't do the math on it myself.
Is that wrong?
I don't know, I can't say. My point is,
I can ask you what your point is.
okay.
Another expert who actually did the math found that between 8:20 to 8:37 a.m., a total of 203.86 megabytes of data came downstream and 6.72 megabytes of data went upstream that was reported. Would you agree with that or disagree with that?
Agree.
Okay. But under your definition, unless the person is actively popping away, then it's not being actively used.
Correct.
Let me ask you this. The best evidence of whether or not this phone was actively being used under your definition would be in the recovery of the device and a forensic examination.
Correct.
And you indicated that you do cellular bright is universal to most officers out there. Most officers have taken the class and they can dump a phone, they can look at that information. That would be the best evidence in this particular case.
Yes.
Okay. And the phone burned up. You were told that. Do you know exactly when the phone was burned up, sir?
Do not.
Do you know whether it was on initial contact?
Do not.
A minute later?
No.
2 minutes later?
No.
3 minutes later?
No.
4 minutes later?
No.
5 minutes later?
No.
6 minutes later?
No.
So you have absolutely no idea whether or not whatever that initial request for data that was made that's being actively fulfilled.
Nobody does.
Well, it's going down to the phone, right?
Yeah, but no one
Okay.
knows where it came from. That's my point. That's what AT&T
It didn't
said.
come from Mars. It's something that's actively on the report. That's a standard disclaimer, like smoking may cause you cancer.
I believe it's a little bit different. I believe.
Have you ever worked for AT&T, sir?
No.
Have you ever held a job at AT&T where you received a paycheck from them?
No.
You ever worked for a consultant for AT&T?
No.
Okay. Sir, did you review the NTSB material in this particular matter?
No.
Were you aware that the NTSB issued a report in this matter?
No. I was asked to look at the discovery which I named.
Okay, so then let's go through what exactly you looked at. Okay. Did it include more than just the phone records?
No.
Okay, what else did you look at?
No, it did not include more than just the phone records.
That's it?
When I did my report, I looked at the phone records. Afterwards, I was provided a copy of the expert's report, so I did read that.
Somebody else's report.
Correct.
Okay, the guy that did the math. Well, let me ask you this question. In terms of what is considered high definitional streaming video, do you know what that looks like in terms of megabytes of data per minute?
No.
Would you know that AT&T, in one of those non-disclaimers, finds that it's 41.7 megabytes of data per minute?
Okay.
You didn't know that? Was that not on the report that you saw from AT&T?
I saw the report from him. It's not in the report from AT&T, no.
Okay. Sir, if I had a video on and I had the phone in my hand and I have the wheel in the other hand, but I'm not actively manipulating any of the numbers or any of the other keyboards on the phone. Under your definition, would I be actively, what was that term, using the phone?
I would say no.
Thank you. No further questions.
Reader.
You're asked about the data between 820 and 837, 200 megabytes. Does that have any specific meaning to it at all?
No.
Is it indicative of a particular type of use?
No, that's the point. By AT&T's own disclaimer, they're stating that they do not know what occurs and whether or not it is AT&T network initiated or customer initiated.
So that 203 megabytes from the NTSB could have been initiated by AT&T.
Yes.
Okay. And it really doesn't matter who's doing the math. It still doesn't tell us what the data means, correct?
Correct. Looking at the speeds and the amount of data really doesn't tell us what we're looking for to answer that question, because we don't know how much came from either source. So of that 40 gigabytes or megabytes, excuse me, then we don't know that that came from the user or AT&T's network. So analyzing that really has no bearing on whether it was actively used.
Okay. And again, you look at these records on a daily basis in your current work?
Yes.
Okay. This is something you analyze the carrier side records, is that correct?
Yes.
Something you do on a daily basis?
Yes.
Have you testified in court about this before?
Yes.
Okay. And so, with regards to when the phone burned up in the truck, you're not opining to that, are you?
No.
Okay. I believe that you did make a distinction that there was a data transfer or session, as you call it, with the carrier, roughly about the time of impact, which continued on for another 6 minutes.
Correct.
And you're not saying that tells you when the phone burned up, are you?
No.
You're just saying that, I believe you said it was highly unlikely that the individual was actively using the phone because the accident had already happened. Is that what you're
Right.
saying? No further questions, thank you.
Recross.
Would you establish a forensic baseline for determining whether the phone was in operation?
I don't make that distinction.
You never established a forensic baseline of use of Mr. McDonald's phone in this case?
There's no way to know. We don't have enough information.
You don't have enough information. In
There's
terms of the 203.86 megabytes, that was actually in the state's expert's report. Were you aware of that?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Nothing further.
Is there there's no way to tell without the phone what apps were open, or anything like that on that?
Yes, Your Honor. There's no way to tell.
These transfers of data from the phone to the carrier internet. If I have an email, let's say I get up in the morning, I drive to work, all my apps are closed out. And then between my home and work, I get 10 emails. Is there communication, and I don't open them up until I'm here, not reading them. Is there going to be data from the
Yes, Your Honor.
from the carrier to my phone saying, hey, you got an email at 7:01, one came in at 7:07?
Yes, Your Honor.
You're going to see that data traffic
You are.
even though my app is closed.
Exactly.
Is the data going to be different size based on what's transmitted?
Yes, Your Honor.
If I say to Siri, open my Audible app and play whatever book, is that considered active use?
I wouldn't say so, Your Honor, because you're not actively manipulating the device. You'd be operating it with your voice. So I wouldn't say that'd be active use.
So if I do an Audible either the app, Audible, listen to a book, or I play music through YouTube Music. Is my phone, are those songs and that data being transmitted as I go down the road, or does my phone catch it and store it and play it as I?
It's a good question. So if you are actively streaming, then it would continue on as you go down the road. If you're accessing a database that has the songs on it, you may download those one time and then play them without using data for that transaction. But the data that comes in as you are listening to music driving down the road on Spotify or Pandora, for instance, is constantly using data.
I may have asked you that. If the phone is not available, what other way is there to evaluate, if there is one, whether apps were in play at the time of the accident?
There's nothing.
There's no cloud storage?
The cloud will have a last backup. The cloud will not have, depending on your settings in your device. So there could be a cloud backup that exists for that time period, depending on the last backup. That data could appear to show you the snapshot of the device at that time, depending on the settings you set. A lot of times the cloud backup, in this case being an Android device, would have those items backed up that you would put onto a new phone. It wouldn't have application information, more like contacts, pictures, and that sort of thing.
Would the app itself have that information? For example, if the phone doesn't exist, could you go to YouTube Music and say, hey, this guy's a subscriber, tell me what this app was doing at such and such a time and date?
No, Your Honor. They don't store that data.
Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor.
Recross. Or
No,
follow-up question.
no forensic baseline, 203.86 megabytes of data that's coming in between 8:20 and 8:37. This guy must be the most unluckiest person in the world that it's just all that device at that point in time just hit. Is that your testimony, sir?
No.
Just a coincidence? You don't know, do you?
No answer to that.
You don't know, do you?
Do I know what?
Do you know whether or not he's somebody that all of a sudden this big dump of 203.86 megabytes of data hitting his phone, download, 6 megabytes of data upload is not related near in time to where this collision occurred, that this was hitting his phone?
My answer is that nobody knows. The data we have does not
So
say,
you
for
can
instance,
speak for yourself. Thanks.
speaking for the data.
You can.
Thank you, sir. You may step down. Mr. Brady.
Your Honor, I have no further witnesses.
All right. Yeah, exhibits you want to
I
introduce?
would, Your Honor. I have essentially. Okay, I have exhibits A through E that we've used here. I think, Your Honor, you have the 2 expert reports, which F would be from Ambassador. It's the one with the colorful cover. That's
This is F?
Yes, sir. And then Invista is Exhibit G, Your Honor.
All right. You're offering then A through G?
Yes, sir.
Mr.
No
Murphy?
objection.
Defendant's exhibits A through G are admitted without objection. All right. Mr. Murphy, you need time?
Exhibit 27. This would be Exhibit Excel Street.
You can do it, rebuttal.
Huh?
No.
No rebuttal.
No rebuttal? You need some time for closing?
You want these, no?
Mr. Murphy, does the state have any rebuttal it will be introducing?
No rebuttal, Your Honor.
All right, then let's take a break, 15 or 20 minutes. I'll let the lawyers gather their thoughts, prepare for closing arguments. We'll come back for closing arguments in about 15, 4:20.
All rise. I gotta try to get mine tonight soon. Sorry. Let's get this out of the way. I'll be back in a second. Oh, I'll be right back. Leo.
How you doing, man? You all right? Right. So,
Something else. I'm looking for any other documents.
right, so I'm gonna stick around with you, 2:30. Go ahead and see. Then, depending where we're at. Huh? Hell no. No way. Are you serious? So you're saying my... Sorry.
Oh, good, I have some.
Yeah, go ahead.
Rise, right side.
Thank you, Yossi. All right. Ready to close the arguments?
Yes,
Mr. Murphy, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yeah, the interesting thing here, Your Honor, is you've heard all the evidence in this particular case. You've had a chance to listen to the witnesses. There are a number of exhibits in this case. There's some issues of law that need to be discussed a little bit, especially in these particular type cases. Like most cases, there's usually direct and circumstantial evidence. This was supposed to be the best of times for the students and staff members at Tusky on November 14th, 2023. The day was supposed to start that way. The day was supposed to be to go to celebrate the appointment of one of their own to the board. They got a special motor coach to transport them. This Van Hool motor coach, it came at about 6:53 in the morning. It was loaded up by the students. The students got to choose based on grades that they're in as to where they were going to sit. With seniors in the back, juniors, sophomores somewhere in the center, and freshmen in the front. The driver was Don Wagler, who was 65 years of age at the time. He's a commercial driver. In this particular case, he'd been driving buses for quite a long period of time. And he shared the same thing that Sam Badawi and Josh Chica shared, which is that it's having a special license. You can't drive a vehicle with a certain weight on it, over 26,000 pounds, unless you have a commercial driver's license. And the reason why this is important is because there's special rules that apply to commercial drivers that don't apply to Class D drivers. There's special training. There's more risk because of the weight and size of the vehicle that you're going to be moving down the roadway. Whether it's in the state of Ohio or whether it's in any other state, there's a uniform code conduct that applies in federal law as well as state law. Ohio has some of those rules as well when it comes down to cell phones. And one of the things to discuss in this case is because there's a lot on cell phones, and there was some interesting things as to what was considered for coming to a conclusion on cell phones. But I think one of the most important things is when the court looks at Jonathan Buffington's report, one of the things that he brings home is that at 8:20 in the morning through 8:37, 203 megabytes of data is downloaded to that phone after a request of about 6 megabytes of data goes up from the phone. I asked the witnesses about forensic baseline. Mr. Buffington testified to that on the AT&T records. You get to see what that baseline is when the defendant was in his rest period, when he was off. His data is about 0. He must be the most unluckiest person in the world that all this data is just ascending or descending, both actually, to and from his phone within 10 minutes of the fatal collision. We think it's important because Ohio does have a statute that was in effect at the time that this collision occurred. It became effective October 3rd, 2023. And it's called driving, and it's while texting. And it basically says this in Division A. No person shall operate a motor vehicle on any street, highway, or property open to the public for vehicular traffic while using or holding an electronic wireless communication device. The reason why I only read those two, there's others, or physically supporting with any part of the person's body. And of course, when you look at the Spartan nature of the interior of this truck, most likely you are holding it. And that is because the defendant's expert has only one standard for actively using it. You literally at the time have to be punching something into it. That may be the law in South Carolina. That may be the law in New Hampshire. It may be the law in Michigan. But in the state of Ohio, that is not the law. The 5th District Court of Appeals had the opportunity in a decision that is State versus Havens, 2024 Ohio, 2204. It was decided on June 7, 2024, that said that the state's obligation is only to prove those aspects in Division A. The state has no obligation to prove any of the other aspects as to whether or not they have an earpiece in, or whether or not they're using it for navigation, or any of those other things. That's not the state's burden. So, with respect to the defendant's expert and to the presentation that was put on regarding what something was actively used, it does not mean that the person at any particular moment in time has to be punching things or data into a phone. It means that they're just using it. And we're not talking about a small amount of data. The testimony is that that data that's coming in is high definition data. We're very close to it. I think it's 41 megabytes, and 40 was actually what was coming in. We heard a lot of things about other sources. The phone was being used. And why is that important here? Well, as the Van Hool bus and the Tusky students had passed exit 117 and were moving forward to Columbus, there was a line of vehicles. And I know that there were some statements about whether these vehicles were stopped or moving. They all were moving. And that is because in 2025, most vehicles are equipped with some kind of forward-facing video cameras. And in this particular case, Sam the Dowie had one of those in his vehicle that was trailing behind, as well as the Volvo driver in the front. Trooper Grimm had a body cam. And you could see that an accident that was further up the roadway that he was at was clearing. And one of the first things you see on the body camera is that you see him looking back and you actually see the plume of smoke coming up. The plume of smoke is something that Trooper Grimm immediately called in for ambulances and emergency response vehicles to go to that location. And when he arrived at that location, his body cam shows what had been unfolding. Prior to that time period, the defendant, who's driving in a particular truck, a 2019 Freightliner, that is not equipped with any kind of lane avoidance or collision systems, that is not equipped with any kind of cruise control that varies based on other vehicles, is heading down the roadway. The sun is to his back. The weather is perfect. There's no ice on the roadway. It's a beautiful day. There's no adverse weather conditions that he had to contend with. As he moved down the roadway, the video camera system from Mr. Badawi shows him pulling away. His last ELD mile per hour figure, besides 0, was 74.7. The speed limit was 70. The vehicle had nearly 50,000 pounds of weight to it. It was carrying 24,000 pounds of battery, lead-acid batteries. He crossed under a bridge with a van in front of him that started moving away immediately into another lane. In front of that van that moved away was a 2015 silver Nissan Murano. It had 3 people in it. That vehicle was slowing down but moving. In front of that was the Van Hool bus, which is 11 feet 6 inches tall. It doesn't get any clearer than that. There was no visual obstruction to seeing that bus on that roadway. In front of the bus was the 2006 Toyota Highlander operated by Mr. Wolverton. And in front of Mr. Wolverton's vehicle was the 2014 Volvo that also had video. And at the time of the collision, the camera in the Volvo shows, there's a couple things that are important here. One is on the video, you can see in the passenger side mirror, you can see an image in the back, and you can see it darken, and you can see it come up as the testimony was. And that's actually the bus. And it doesn't happen immediately. But when it happens, you can see that his vehicle is pushed forward. And you can see the extensive damage that is on the back doorway and container area of that trailer that he was pulling. But what you can also see, more importantly, before that is that traffic was slowly moving. It's a common experience to anyone that operates a motor vehicle. It's not a first in this world that traffic will slow down and speed up. We entrust 16-year-olds in this state to operate motor vehicles. That we entrust them to understand and know what their obligations are when they're driving. That is not the obligation of someone who is a commercial driver's license, who has specialized training in order to have that license, who has been driving that same route for over the last year as a routine. He's well aware of what's happening. His statement, I don't remember anything past exit 126. So from exit 126 to 118, he has nothing that he remembers. Dr. Lee testified that there was nothing that he saw, in his opinion, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty that he would have not been able to be attentive to the roadway. And at that time, what's going on is all this data has been sent up from his phone and is coming down from his phone. He had one job, literally. The seat is set up. It's not meant to be sarcastic. It's not meant to be diminutive. It's the obvious. The seat in that cab is set up for the driver to look forward. There's no center console between the driver's position, a center, I'm looking for a word, your console, between the driver's seat and the passenger seat. It's an open space. They have a radio that looks like it's from the 1990s. Some of us would know what those radios look like. They're terrible. There's really no place for this person to put a phone other than a cup holder. That's it. There's no way that he had access or had any ability to use that phone under the rules that he signed as an employee in 2020 for the company. You can't use it. In fact, if we call you, you have to wait till you're off the road. And yet he's getting high definitional quality video. The most important time frame starting at 8:20 to 8:37. And when their expert was on the stand, and he says, well, I didn't measure the distance from the bridge to the area of impact, which is typically and traditionally what is referred to as an area of impact, but not in this case. That is because the area is so pronounced that they can tell exactly where this happened. And the photographs in Exhibit 23 show this area with clarity. You had a truck that Trooper Jasper has a low speed of 72, he said, which their expert said was the best estimate. Asked about the ELD speed, he's like, yes, that's within that range. The speed limit's 70. The speed that he hit the Nissan was 72 miles an hour at minimum. The Nissan was not tailgating the bus. The Nissan wasn't at a standstill. The Nissan was moving. The impact was so over the top, brutal, that his semi literally went over and pushed down onto the roadway, the Nissan, and literally took the top part off of the roof line of this Nissan. And what's the most telling on this is that there's no evidence that he had any braking whatsoever prior to this event. The testimony is not disputed. That question was asked directly. There is no evidence that this person applied their brakes, a professional driver with years of experience, who had one job, and that is look forward and out that windshield. Hit his brakes. And how do we know that? In addition to the different ways that Sergeant Jasper figured this out. From the distance he measured from the bridge to that point of impact is 800 feet. The testimony of their own expert, 6.5 to 7 seconds at 72 miles an hour, which he believed was 105 feet. It's 105 in a couple decimal points, actually. Every second he wasn't looking out that window. And on a step-by-step basis, there was nothing that prevented him from doing that. His training, his obligation, he's aware of that. You heard testimony from Josh Chica, who said, I put the vehicle in the ditch. Well, how would you know? I was watching the road. That's what professional drivers do. They watch the road. That's their one job. Their one job is to make sure that they can bring their vehicle to a stop. Sam Badawi said that. Sam Badawi said, well, yes, I have the entirety of the automatic brakes, the collision avoidance, the side impact detection. I also have the cruise control that is modulated by speed. And in fact, my company takes it so seriously that even if there's not a collision, that they'll still deduct money from me if I get too close to another vehicle. And why is that? Because like every other profession, they demand professionalism. They just don't give that license to a 16-year-old. As far as the bus driver is concerned, yeah, the man's a hero. The man lost a leg. The man basically, we were talking about perception time and reaction time. The man almost immediately turned the steering wheel of his bus to the right. And that's the only reason Mr. Wolverton is still with us. With a broken leg at the time, he still managed to get off the bus and open the doors, and testified that he was the last one off the bus. He lost that leg as a result of this. You heard from Bryn Goodell. The only reason that she was alive and is alive today is that she never made it to the bathroom, because if she did, she'd be dead. The reason she's alive is because Josh Chica came across the roadway, helped pull Mr. Wolverton out of the vehicle with Trooper Grimm, went on the bus, pulled numerous people off the bus, including Bryn, the person that she smiled at before she went and got into the bathroom, died. As well as 2 other people on the bus, a total of 3. There was no effort of braking. Even after he ran over the Nissan Murano, even after it continued down the road, there's no braking. When they looked at the steering column, it was broken in a straight position. There was no effort to turn. And the one photograph that Mr. Mann took before police arrived shows the defendant outside of his vehicle with his hands, Exhibit 3, his hands in the air. Absolutely no idea what happened. The reason he had absolutely no idea what happened is because he had one job, and he wasn't doing that one job. He wasn't looking at the road as a professional driver is required to do. Your Honor, there's 3 different groupings of charges in this particular case. The first grouping goes to aggravated vehicular homicide. This encompasses the 6 people that lost their lives 3 of them on the bus, all 3 people in East Almirano. The next charge is vehicular assault, next grouping of charges. Both groupings of charges of aggravated vehicular homicide and vehicular assault require the state to prove that on the 14th day of November 2023 in Licking County, Ohio, the defendant did recklessly cause the death or serious physical harm to the individuals that are here. The court has stipulations that the state and the defendant have entered into. Those stipulations say that the defendant concedes that he is the proximate cause of what occurred here. The defendant concedes that it happened in Licking County on the date and time as stated in the indictment, and that the death and the injuries resulted from his conduct. The defendant is contesting whether or not his conduct was reckless, which is what the state is contending, or whether his conduct was only negligent. There is a difference. Perhaps the best difference in the most on-point case is State versus Beard. It was decided by the 8th District, January 18th, 2024. The citation is 2024 Ohio 161. And what this case talks about is a person who was driving a dump truck into a construction zone that after he dumped the load in the zone, failed to lower the bed of the dump truck and drove out from the dump truck area, or the construction area, onto the roadway. He then got onto a ramp and he hit a sign with the raised bed of the dump truck. That sign fell and killed somebody in a half-ton pickup truck. And what the court spoke about in this particular case is the known risk of driving with the bed of that truck in the upward position. What we're talking about in this particular case under the definition of recklessness, which they also define, is a person acts recklessly when with heedless indifference to the consequences, the person disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk that the person's conduct is likely to cause a certain result or is likely to be a certain nature. Person is reckless with respect to circumstances when with heedless indifference to the consequences, the person disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk that such circumstances are likely to exist. That is within paragraph 14 of the Beard decision, as well as in Ohio Revised Code section 2901.22c. And why that's important is that, as in Beard, as with this defendant, he is aware in 2 separate circumstances that even independent of each other, but more so when combined with each other, especially after he signed the documents, especially after he went through the training, that when you close your eyes for 6.5 to 7 seconds and you're not looking at the roadway because you're distracted, you have, with heedless indifference to those consequences, disregarded a substantial and unjustifiable risk. And in this case, that the vehicles in front of him would be impacted not only by his truck, but the momentum of his truck. the cell phone makes it even worse. The data getting there after that level of request and that amount coming down to his phone, right at the same time or near in time to when these collisions occur. We believe that the defendant's acts in this particular case for the purposes of the aggravated vehicular homicide and the vehicular assault have been established under the reckless standard. The final group of charging is misdemeanor assaults. The standard, the elements for that is that the date that this occurred, which is again November 14, 2023, again in Licking County, Ohio, again the causation, all of which is stipulated. But essentially it is that the defendant knowingly caused or attempted to cause physical harm to individuals. 2901.22 of the revised code, subsection B, says that a person acts knowingly regardless of purpose when the person is aware that the conduct will probably cause a certain result or will probably be of a certain nature. Closing your eyes for 6.5 to 7 seconds. A person has knowledge when the person is aware that such circumstances probably exist. When it's a particular element of offense, this knowledge is established as the person subjectively believes there's a high probability of its existence, fails to make, inquire, or acts with the conscious purpose to avoid learning the facts. We heard from 3 professional drivers. Again, he had one job. He didn't do it. It's part of the training. It's part of the requirement in order to do this. You're under 1.8 miles away from this. This truck was at 74.7 miles an hour, accelerating from 71 miles per hour, going up a hill. He wasn't driving on cruise control. He had his foot on the pedal, and he had his eyes someplace else. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Mr. Bridges, your closing remarks.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Murphy. On day one, we heard from Kimberly Charlton. She was the 20-year volunteer on the bus. She sat next to Miss Gensley, who was the van driver. And Miss Charlton had testified that she had told Trooper Keaton that she experienced aggressive braking, like, I have to stop now. On direct, she described it as all he had. That's a significant piece of evidence on the record, Your Honor. And it's backed up by Stephen Tripp's testimony that he's studying for his master's degree, he's engrossed in his studies, and there was an aggressive braking that caused him to lose his concentration on his studies and look up. Between these two pieces of testimony of the witnesses on the bus describe an aggressive braking event. Now, when we combine that with the fact that the bus driver veered to the right, he steers to the right, we know that. He tells us he did. Kim Charlton also told us that he had steered to the right. What's important is that both Stephen Tripp and Kim Charlton both use mere seconds and then the impact in the rear. So we have the braking event, we have mere seconds, and we have the impact in the rear. And we have the steering to the right by the bus driver. And we have, through, I believe it was Trooper Grimm, we have the impact areas from the bus to the Toyota Highlander in front of it. We know it was the driver's side corner, and we know that it hit about mid-tailgate on the Toyota Highlander and increases the damage as it pushes over to the passenger side. So all that fits. We also know from the data that the Toyota Highlander was going approximately 9 miles an hour. According to Trooper Jasper's own data, that the bus was going approximately 25 miles an hour. So the bus is going faster. So all this starts to add up to the fact that the bus driver had a hard braking event, steers to the right to avoid hitting that Toyota Highlander. I asked him that, could the Highlander have had its brakes on? He answered, I don't know. So we talked at length about the Volvo in front too. We spent a lot of time on the Jake brake, the fact that it allows the truck to slow along with the transmission once engaged. It's highly plausible that he was doing just that, that the Highlander begins to slow. It's going slower than the bus. And it's possible that the bus driver in that moment was distracted as well. He looks up, he sees the Highlander, realizes he's going faster than it. He hits the hard braking event, like I have to stop now, all he had, and veers to the right. And when he does this, the Murano has to react to the bus that's braking hard. So the Murano applies its brakes. And along comes Jacob McDonald and impacts that, the Murano. Now, what's critical to this is the white van, Eugene Mann's. This is a critical piece of evidence that's been left out on every single solitary reconstruction chart, never accounts for the white van. And it's significant in two ways, Your Honor. It's significant because, as we've seen from the Freightliner video behind, that Eugene Mann's comes out of the right lane into the left lane. He doesn't do it aggressively, he moves over. It indicates there's not an immediate threat in front of him. He doesn't yank the wheel over. He moves out. Jacob McDonald's coming up next to him. And when I asked Eugene Mann's, you were flowing next to him, he says yes. We talked about the silver metallic piece, and I played it back a couple of times. And after that, I said, that's when you heard the loud boom. You were flowing next to him. He says yes. Now, Eugene testifies that he heard the boom. He looks out his window to the passenger side and sees the truck hitting into the bus. And then he looks back, and he describes it as a burgundy SUV, which is the Toyota Highlander, and takes evasive maneuvers. What's important about that is I asked him, did you take evasive maneuvers before you saw the SUV in your lane? He thought about it for a moment and then said no. That's critical, Your Honor, because if he's flowing next to Jacob McDonald, not taking any evasive maneuvers, and we have this hard braking event from the bus which causes the Murano to brake, and the semi impacts it, which he hears the boom, and now 1.5 seconds, that's in video, that's indisputable, that from the impact, we've all agreed, frame 33's impact. 1.5 seconds later, he begins to veer to the left, which means the burgundy SUV, really the Toyota Highlander, is in his lane. It's 1.5 seconds. And that's important on a twofold. That sequence of events. One, it furthers the theory that in the very beginning, that the bus broke hard, like I have to stop now, and veered to the right because he would almost hit that Highlander. That was the hard braking event, which caused the Murano to hit the brakes, which caused Jacob, who at the time was likely looking out the window or doing something where his eyes were not on the road, and he impacts the Murano. But what's critical about that moment is Eugene Mann's van, his white van, is flowing next to him. Twice I asked him, he's flowing next to him, and you can watch the video. Then that means that he's behaving in the same way that Jacob is behaving at this point in time. That neither one of them are behaving recklessly. You would have to say Eugene was too. He doesn't take evasive maneuvers for another 1.5 seconds until that burgundy, until he hears the boom. 1.5 seconds later, the burgundy SUV comes in his lane. That's very important. Now, I asked Sergeant Jasper, is it possible that after the impact of the Murano, did he not have the faculties to hit the brakes? He agreed, that could be possible. That large impact. Now, we've heard about distracted driving. There's lots of scenarios that go on there. I think there's there's a lot of different scenarios it could be, but one of them that was suggested was perhaps he was looking at the white van. It's not uncommon. You're on a route that you do all the time. You're thinking about other things, and you half-heartedly look out your window at the vehicle next to you. Maybe it's a vehicle you like. Maybe there's something wrong with it you're focused on. Maybe the passenger is doing something and you can see through the window and you're trying to figure out what they're doing. But we've all done that. You're looking over here. And then the impact. The part where the state makes this 6.5 second claim then you have to assume that the threat or the braking event occurred clear back at the bridge in frame 24. And that simply can't be, and we know that because Eugene moves over like a normal person would. He did not react to an event right in front of him. That kills the 6 second thing. Where did that braking event occur? Someplace after that. We know the impact was at 33, but you can't definitively say it was 6.5 seconds from the bridge shadow, which would be frame 25 or 26, all the way up to 33, that he had his eyes closed. Also in contradiction of that is the videos of the semi-truck drivers driving down the road that we saw. And in both of those videos, if you were to believe that that's what looking at video is on your phone, then that doesn't really apply to this case. If that were the baseline, then Jacob couldn't have been doing that. Because in both of those, their eyes are up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. And in both cases, they see the cars right before they hit them. In both cases, they turn the wheel, and you can see them tense up on the brake. And that's not the claim here. We've gone through the steering box. The steering box was... So he wouldn't have been doing this. It contradicts the 6.5 second thing, too. Up to that point, Your Honor, we know that there's no reason to disbelieve Kim Charlton and Stephen Tripp. And the evidence, the physical evidence lines up to that. That was a hard braking event, and he went to avoid that Highlander, and with only 1.5 seconds before Eugene makes that invasive maneuver, it means that bus had to be right on that Highlander at the time of impact. He had to have been. So only 1.5 seconds before it gets pushed into Eugene's lane, and Eugene's going to avoid it. He had to have been right on that thing, which explains a hard braking event. Then we have the EDR data from the Nissan, which cannot be relied upon. We spent a great deal of time with that, but we have two problems with it that still have not been explained away. One being that the physical evidence demonstrates the Nissan was 40 feet from the bus. I believe that was State's Exhibit 26 that shows the point of impact on paper. After the first impact, which would be Jacob's semi hitting the Nissan, the first event is triggered. And that's the one that says the 57 mile an hour delta. But just 0.1 of a second later, it says there's a second triggered event, which presumably would be the impact with the bus, which would mean 11 feet have passed by, which is in contradiction of the physical evidence that everyone agrees to, that the Nissan was 40 feet away. So if the EDR is telling us you were only 11 feet away, that contradicts the physical evidence. The other big problem with that is we go back to the Toyota Highlander and we look at its data, it has a 40 mile an hour speed increase after impact, after the bus hits it. Well, the Nissan says a 35 mile an hour. Well, that can't be. It's in the chain of events. It can't be a slower speed back at the Nissan and an increased speed up at the Highlander. The data is flawed somewhere. No one's explained it. Sergeant Jasper left event trigger 2 completely out of his report. Didn't even discuss it. When we get to the cell phone data, without the cell phone data, with that as a plausible explanation of the events, that there was a heartbreaking event that occurred after Eugene moved out of that lane, like a normal person would, occurred someplace in between those frames up to frame 33, which is very plausible, that Jacob McDonald was looking out his window or looking at someplace in the cab. In fact, I believe I asked Sergeant Jasper, could he have been doing a flexing routine, and his response is that it could have been in any numerous of things. So there could have been any explanation as to why his eyes weren't on the road at that, in those last few seconds. We also have the perception time reaction. It could be a second and a half to build in there too. But that's being negligent, Your Honor. That's not being reckless. Taking your eyes off the road momentarily to look at a car next to you, observe what it's doing, is negligent. The cell phone. Your Honor, there's not a single expert that's come in here, from Sergeant Jasper to Mr. Buffington to Mr. Gentile, that can tell us what it is. AT&T themselves say, we cannot tell you if we initiated it or you initiated it, and we cannot tell you what that data means. When the state can claim 203 sounds like a heck of a lot of data, we still don't know what it is. We still, to say that someone is streaming a video at that point, you're merely guessing. That's it. And nobody could explain to us, since it's not really 41.7, which is what the NTSB claims that AT&T discloses on the consumer level of what high definition streaming is, and we're only at 38. Does that mean conclusively that it couldn't have been that? Nobody can answer that question either. We don't know what the data was. No one can opine to the fact that that data would demonstrate that an individual was actively manipulating his phone. In fact, the state's cell phone expert defined initially when he said on the stand, active use is he made sure he defined that when he first sat down. Cell phone use is using the cell phone is using the network to accomplish a task. That was his definition of active use when he sat down on the stand. Now later he opines that he was using his phone, which seems to be in contradiction to that. He seems to have come up with a two-fold definition of what active cell phone use is. But most interestingly would be that he has no analytical forensic baseline that he used. In fact, he used the totality of the circumstances, and I listed two of those, the first two elements out of his report, if you recall. One of them was did it make any difference to if I feel good or I feel bad with my cell phone connecting to the carrier? And he agreed, no, it does not. That's his first element in the totality of the circumstances. The second element was he discussed Jacob's familiarity with the route. Again, he's just quoting the NTSB all the way for 10 pages of this report. But I asked him, my familiarity with the geographic location, does that affect how my phone connects to the carrier? He agreed it did not. Well, that's in his totality of the circumstances analysis. And if you recall, I asked him, did you ever take 100 different phones from different carriers and look at the data and say, hey, if you're streaming video, this is kind of the average, and then compare it back to our results? No. That would have been scientific. His was, I read the NTSB report and just kind of made a guess. And most interesting is that he made the claim from the stand that somehow AT&T really does know what that data is. If you recall that. I said, why don't you have that? You're in a case testifying as an expert. 6 people died. Why don't you have that? His answer was, I wish I had it. Your Honor, that was a gross error to make that statement from the stand. And all the work the NTSB has done, and all the work Sergeant Jasper and his team has done, and all the work Invista and their team has done, none of them have come up with the fact that AT&T has some secret knowledge in the background of what that data actually means. That goes to his credibility as a witness, Your Honor. Your Honor, the state is correct that in counts 1 through 6, the defense has conceded or stipulated that as charged in the indictment, that the events did occur in Licking County on November 14th, 2023, and that Jacob McDonald driving the Freightliner semi was the proximate cause of the death of those 6 individuals in counts 1 through 6. And in counts 7 through 15, the same elements. Rather, the death caused serious physical harm to those individuals. However, in both of those, in counts 1 through 15, the defense contends that that proximate cause was due to Mr. McDonald's negligence. And the state failed to present any evidence that would demonstrate that he was reckless or operated with a heedless indifference to those around him. In counts 16 through 26, Mr. McDonald's charged with misdemeanor assault. The defense acknowledges that individuals after the fact of the accident were harmed. However, we contest or deny that Mr. McDonald did knowingly harm those individuals. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Rebuttal?
Thank you. There are no names. We start out close by talking to jurors about that both myself and Mr. Brigden, who's a very good lawyer, will tell you this is what we believe the evidence is. Please utilize your own memory, review your notes carefully, decide the issues in this particular regard. One of the most important issues is subjective versus subjective. And the state talked about objective evidence on the facts that were brought before the court. Subjective evidence that the vehicles are moving. There's objective evidence that from the sight line, the defendant had absolutely no difficulty, had the defendant been doing his one job, looking out the window to bring his vehicle to a stop. It wants to cherry pick testimony from Mr. Charlton, Mr. Tripp. In fact, I think Sergeant Jasper said it's pretty evenly split as to what subjectively folks on the bus were doing, other than the driver. And that is because what they were doing on the bus was as they were getting ready to celebrate going to the Columbus Convention Center. They were not there to document what was about to happen. Mr. Tripp had several jobs, actually. He was there as assistant band director. He wanted to work on one of two parts of his master's degree, one down and one back that he's working on. And he also has to, keep an eye and make sure that the noise level and things in the bus stays at room temperature, maybe, so to speak, is the best way of saying it. In terms of the bus driver hard braking, we have objective data that that isn't the case. That there were two recorded and logged hard braking events, one in September and one in August. The bus didn't record a hard braking event on November 14, 2023. That's objective. As far as trying to place the blame on Mr. Mann, or say that somehow he only had 1.5 seconds because of what Mr. Mann did. The video, Sam Badawi's video, as well as the PowerPoint where you can watch slide by slide, objectively shows that that's just not accurate. Mr. Mann had no difficulty bringing his vehicle to stop, other than the fact that he had a Toyota Highlander coming at him because of the conduct of the defendant. The man's a hero. 6.5 to 7 seconds is what we see on Mr. Badawi's video, PowerPoint, that their own expert agreed on the stand that he would have that time. 11 feet 6-inch bus in front of that. You didn't see any of those things? You weren't able to bring your vehicle to stop on those kind of weather conditions? He wants to talk about videos. I think he missed the point of the videos. That Mr. Buffington had. And the point of it is that when the brain is engaged in doing one activity, and then you want your brain to also do another activity, and also do another activity, Mr. Tripp was doing at least 3 of those. It's very difficult then to break from those activities and then visualize and react. And why that's so important is that you see these 2 trucks in those videos are able to maintain their lane, just like the defendant was. You see them looking up or down, at least in the one. The other one, you see the hand on the phone. And what's happening is that you're so focused on the phone that you're actually looking short. You're not looking distances, you're not perceiving distances, you're just looking up short and you're going back to what you're doing. And with all due respect to the data, well, we don't know what app he was on, or we don't know what he was doing. Or how do we know that it was queried? We know it was queried by him, which is the definition Mr. Buffington gave too. Ohio would utilize both of those. If you query the network from your phone, whether or not you crash at that moment, or whether or not 203 megabytes of data come down the line and you're watching it down the road, doesn't matter. You queried and you are receiving data. And it's not an email. An email doesn't contain that amount of data going to his phone. Well, how do we know then about the EDR for the Nissan? Well, he said he had an Excel sheet and he didn't bring it with him, so I showed him one as to when the events occurred, because he presented an argument that it was twisted, and therefore it was unreconcilable. So then I showed him Exhibit 27. What I was waiting for him to do is to recognize that one of these graphs was in miles per hour and the other was in kilometers. And he was confused, he couldn't answer it, but they did line up. And he said, well, they line up, but they're not consistent with this table. You've only selectively looked at a specific point. You haven't looked at the totality of what's going on here. And I think that's pretty much came from both their experts. Their other expert had such meaningful insight into the phone records. He said, hey, I read the disclaimer, that's what I'm going to say. Can't really comment on anything else. I did one field thing with AT&T. Never don't know what their thing is other than I see this here. That's not an expert. That's not an expert opinion. Your Honor, in this particular case, the state appreciates your patience, appreciate your time. On behalf of myself and Mr. Brigden in this particular matter, I know that these are tough cases, and the state at this point in time would rest. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the matter under advisement. I have a lot of exhibits, reports, data to get through. Tomorrow I hope to be able to announce or schedule when I will have a verdict. I anticipate it probably will be early next week. I know people coming from different parts of out of county, so I will make sure there's plenty of advance notice communicated to the parties so that there's enough time for everyone to get here, at least those folks who want to be here. So I anticipate at this point Monday, Tuesday of next week. If that changes, I'll certainly let the parties know, and that'll be communicated to everybody. With regard to the exhibits, do I have your...
Do you have a combination there, Your Honor? You have...
I'm not...
You have
the videos...
the videos and the other stuff are actually in this one. Reporters for the I'm sorry, for the witnesses.
Those are on thumb drives, I assume?
Thumb drive, Your Honor, yes.
Okay, great. All right, then. Is there anything further then before we recess?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Mr. McDonald.
Where the little boxy is in the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas Jasper said